what do we read into his resignation? Tell us what kind of state of mind do you think he is in?
Well, I mean, he's clearly furious. It's been triggered, I think, by him receiving a copy of the Privileges Committee report, or at least the first draft of their report. It doesn't make pleasant reading for him. You can take that for certain. They've obviously found him guilty of misleading Parliament and recommended a punishment of over 10 days suspension, which would trigger a recall petition and potentially see him lose his seat at a by-election. So he's decided to preempt that by going off his own volition. So I think that was what triggered it. But you're right, this 1,000-word statement was really unusual for that to happen, really, in those circumstances. And he just vents, he lashes out, clearly very angry with Rishi Sunak, very angry with Remainers. He was just getting it all off his chest, so he's clearly very angry. But you're right, he does make the point that he's resigning, at least for now. So he obviously still has ambitions to come back. I'm not sure how feasible that is. I mean, the polls all suggest that Labour are heading for victory at the next election. I don't think he would fancy coming back to be leader of the opposition. He wants to be Prime Minister again, and I don't see that happening now this side of a general election.
And it has to be said, being leader of the opposition is a very, very difficult job. You have to work incredibly hard for very little reward. And just before we move on to the by-elections, Kevin, who does, if he wanted to throw his hat in the ring for Nadine Dorries' seat, for example, mid-Bedfordshire, can the party block him, or can they completely block him, or can they just make life difficult for him?
Yeah, I think they make life very difficult. I mean, in theory, it's a decision for the local Conservative Association. However, in the circumstances at the moment, I can imagine CCHQ and Number 10 leaning very heavily on them to make sure that Boris Johnson was nowhere near a shortlist to stand in that by-election. I mean, it really would be an incredible turn of events were that to happen. And I don't really know whether indeed the good people of Mid-Bedfordshire's Conservative Association would be amenable to that. They might feel that they're just a cog in the great Boris Johnson wheel, so they might actually not fancy the idea. That being said, I'm sure there are a lot of Conservative associations across the country who would gladly have Boris Johnson as their candidate because they think the guy is electoral stardust, so potentially there is a way back, but I still think it's very, very difficult.
And it's important to note that as much as there's lots of people out in the airwaves who are very hostile to Boris Johnson, there are a lot of people who are still quite sympathetic to him and his politics. Kevin, let's just talk now about the timing of these by-elections. So we've got three. Let's keep the one in Scotland separate. We've got three. We've got Uxbridge, we've got we've got Selby and Ainsty and Mid-Bedfordshire. How soon are these going to happen? I mean, how quickly will the chief whip of the Conservative Party want to move these writs to get these by-elections in motion? Because presumably they want to get them out the way as soon as possible and not have them drag over the summer. I don't think you can have a by-election in August, but what's your thinking on timing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the clock is already ticking down to recess next month for the summer. Then they're not back until September. Then it's a couple of weeks, really. Then it's conference time again. So it really needs to be done before them, not least because these constituencies need to have members of Parliament. As things stand at the moment, they don't, because all three of them resign with immediate effect. So yeah, it's going to have to be done pretty quick, smart, which isn't ideal, to put it mildly, for Rishi Sunak. It's the last thing he wants, really, is to be fighting three by-elections. Now, we saw what happened last year with big majorities. They can tumble in by-elections. They're very curious events. Labour clearly reckon Uxbridge is in the bag. The Lib Dems fancy Mid-Bedfordshire, although 24,000 majority there for the Conservatives. And again, I mean, Nigel Adams going today, which is another bombshell. That opens up his seat as well. Labour 20 odd thousand behind at the last election, so that looks quite safe in inverted commas for the Conservatives. But as I say, by-elections are very difficult to predict, and it sucks the oxygen out of the government at a time when what Rishi Sunak wants to talk about is stopping the boats, AI, cost of living, bringing down inflation, he's actually going to have to basically get out on the stump and worry about losing potentially 3 more Conservative seats. So yeah, it's far from ideal, and it does make you think that it's some way coordinated by allies of Boris Johnson to try and destabilise Rishi Sunak, because I think that is basically what is going to happen now. It gives him a massive headache.